Okay, everyone, we're going to switch over to our question and answer, sorry, not a question, our Northwest Grower panel. I'm going to share my screen and just get set up. I see Lynda's join us, and Mieko, Peter, and Mike. There's Mike, if you want to turn on your cameras. Let me get my screen shared here and we'll get set up and ready to get started. Yeah, so welcome to our first panel of the day. This is with our Northwest growers. All of these are based in the Willamette Valley. And to wrap up our morning session, as well as our kind of Northwest content, we've assembled a wonderful group of native seed and plant growers for this panel. The purpose of this panel is to gain a better understanding of what it takes to grow native seeds and plants and the specific challenges associated with growing native species. As you listen to our panelists answer questions and start coming up with some of your own, please consider the challenges they might face growing native species, including growing from local sources, growing diverse species, and growing some from diverse genetics. So we're going to start with grower introductions, and then feel free to start asking questions, although I do know that there's still a lot of Tom's questions in the question and answer box here, so hopefully he can address some of those as we're going through our introductions. But yeah, please start thinking of questions you want to ask of our growers. We'll start with introductions, and then we'll start with an IAE questions from the growers. So panelists, yep, I see you all, and we'll start with Lynda for a couple minutes of an introduction.
Go, okay. So we started our native seed production program in 2001, and we now grow about 100 species of Willamette Valley prairie species for seed, both upland and wetland prairie. Mostly we focus on forbs, but also grow a lot of carex species and some grasses. Most of the seed that we grow is for commercial sales. We do a small amount of grow out for contract for the West Eugene wetlands and for IEA. And we grow on 40 acres on one farm now. Used to have 2 farms, now just on one. And pretty much our focus is small plots that average like a 1/10 to a 20th of an acre because we're crazy. Some of the species like Sedalcia, which are a little bit more simpler sort of to grow, we do up to about a 1/2 acre plot, but mostly small plots. And as you can see from the photos, we harvest seed with different methods depending on what we're doing in the plot size. So we have some that we use a modified swather on to capture everything in a trailer. Some things we do by hand, sometimes we do by shop vac, we do it on ground cloth, open field, so lots of different methodologies. Our niche, I would say, is high diversity, thus the 100 species on small plots. About 50% of what we produce is used in seed mixes. So we produced about 5,500 pounds of seed, or we sold 5,500 pounds of seed last year, and 50% of that was seed mixes. So high diversity seed mixes, I guess, is our niche. That's it.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lynda. Next, we have Peter Kenagy from Kenagy Family Farm here in Albany, Oregon.
So can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I probably got started producing native seed probably just a little before Lynda did. And the native seed is a small portion of our operation. We farm about 320 acres along the Willamette River near Albany. Our main crops, we typically have 4 or 5 different grasses every year. We've raised as many as 7 different grasses. And I currently have, I think, 4 forbs in production. And over the course of the years, we've experimented with another dozen or so. And, you know, our niche, and I work closely with Pacific Northwest natives. He markets most of my seed. I sometimes contract seed. I've contracted with IAE, with the BLM, with Portland Metro way back when I started. But I've kind of settled on ones that I can do well, and have kind of figured out how to grow, and I have a reasonable market for. So.
Okay, thanks, Peter. And then next is Mieko from the Friends of Buford Park and Mount Pisgah Nursery.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us on here, Alexis. And so I work with the Friends of Buford Park and Mount Pisgah, which is a little bit different. We're a nonprofit, and our mission is to protect and enhance endangered, or to protect and enhance native ecosystems and compatible recreation in the Mount Pisgah area. And if you're not familiar with that, it's in the southern Willamette Valley, the upper Willamette, I guess you could call it, where the Middle Fork and the Coast Fork rivers come together. Mount Pisgah Buford Park is a Lane County park, about 2,200 acres. So that is a county facility, and the Friends work in collaboration with other partners. And we do a lot of stewardship and restoration projects, both within that park and adjacent areas, which includes floodplain and oak, savanna, and prairie. So a lot of that restoration activity and ongoing stewardship required native seed. And so that's when we started our native seed nursery, probably in about 2004. We grow, so our primary use of that seed is for stewardship in that area, but when we have extra, we do offer it to partners in the Willamette Valley. So we grow about 130 species of 100 of those are forbs and about 25 graminoids, so sedges and rushes and grasses. And then we do grow a small number of shrubs as well for live stakes and that sort of thing. So yeah, I think that's it for me.
Okay, great. Thanks and welcome. And then we have Mike Ridling with Seven Oaks Native Nursery.
Hi there. Thanks for having me. At Seven Oaks, we grow, we're a wholesale nursery that grows trees, shrubs, forbs, grasses, and kind of everything from larger sizes on down to plug size. We used to be primarily bare root. We've moved over to container over the years because the demand for native containers is year round and seems to consistently be increasing year after year. We do a lot of bulbs as well. That's something that demand is increasing on as well. We probably do in the 300 to 400 different species that kind of change each year. There's probably about 300 that we do regularly. And I'd say we're probably closer to 300 than 400. In the past, it was up higher, but we've kind of X'd out some species either due to not being able to get seed regularly, not as much demand as we think there should be, or whatever the reason, or difficult losses. That's kind of a number one reason a lot of times. Forbs and grasses are probably growing in numbers more than anything else that we do. The demand for those is kind of just almost doubling every year. It's kind of nice to see. I'd call us a medium-sized farm, I guess, or small, but that's all depends on what, you know, that's up against, but we're probably medium sized. We're 16 acres and pretty much the entirety of it's full, and we try to have it turned over kind of once a year. So as far as a niche, I'm not sure there. We try to, not X too many people out as far as being able to purchase here. If someone just needed a couple plants, we kind of don't do that anymore and don't find a way to make that work. But otherwise, we're kind of, selling plants to people that order $200 or people that order thousands of plants for jobs. So it's kind of challenging to meet all the needs from A to Z right there, but that's about it.
Great. Thanks, Mike, and welcome. So I am seeing and trying to filter through the rest of Tom's questions and seeing some new questions for growers. I do want to note, if you have a question for a specific grower, please put their name in there with your question. And I think there's a couple in here that could relate to just one or two of you already. But to get things started, and while we wait for the Q&A to kind of filter through, I just wanted to start with the first question of and ask each of you, and we'll go back in the same order that we did introductions. But what made you, on a personal level, decide to get into growing native plants and seeds? So we could start with you, Lynda, for that one.
Well, in 2001, I actually was hired at Heritage to facilitate restoration work on the farms. They had riparian habitat, but also one farm that had prairie. And then I had started to look around for prairie seed, and there was pretty much for upland or various natives was very focused on wetland restoration and wetland prairie. So I said, okay, well, we need it. So I was already working with Fish and Wildlife in the Partners Program. And I asked Steve Smith, the director at the time, I said, well, if we start to grow it, will you buy it? So that was the beginning question was, well, if we're going to put all of this effort into doing something I knew absolutely nothing about, zero, was there a market? And Steve said, yes, we don't have really a lot of upland choices and we want diversity. So it was like, oh, okay, now how do I do that? And sort of like what Mieko's, come across is like, yeah, I mean, let's just try to grow everything and see what works. And so that's why we kept everything really small with the small plots, because one of the advice I got from other growers was don't overplant. There's not a big enough demand. We're sitting on acres and, hundreds and hundreds of pounds of seed that nobody's buying. And so that's why we walked before we ran. And it took up till like 2009 and until we actually we got a cooperative agreement with Fish and Wildlife. And then I think what happened really that was very important for all the growers, especially like Peter and Craig and other people, is once buyers and agencies understood, oh, there's seed out there, and then IA joined in and with the cooperative, then project managers could go, wow, I can actually prep a 300-acre site and in 3 years have enough seed to actually put back in the site. So this was such a very baby market early on, but I think that's where we're at now, where managers feel really comfortable and confident, or at least that they can start projects and actually get seed on the ground.
Great. Thanks, Lynda. Peter?
I first got interested and started in it, and it would have been in the late 90s, I think. And I had found an interesting grass that I was unfamiliar with in our forested area, one of our forested areas. And I took it down to the extension agent and had him ID it. And it turned out to be Elmus glaucus, blue wild rye. And I thought it was interesting, and so I hand collected some seed and blew it up. And about that time, somebody from the city of Portland, I think it was Mark Wilson, got a hold of the extension agent and asked if there was a grower around that might be interested in producing some native seed. And so I got connected with the city of Portland and ended up doing some wetland seed production for them for a year or two. and got connected with Craig Edminster, and we started installing a seed cleaning equipment in our barns, and it's just kind of grown from there. And you know, it fluctuates from year to year how much we produce, and it is really easy to overproduce some stuff. You know, you always either have too much or not enough. It's rare when you hit it just right.
Yeah, I can imagine. Great, thanks. And then Mieko?
Yeah, so I guess I'll just answer this more on as a personal journey. Way back when I was a little baby, I always no. So I've always been interested in plants and animals, and early on, after graduating with a biology degree and trying to figure out how to do what I wanted to do, which was just, well, someone pay me to just play in the woods. And since that wasn't really happening, I ended up working in some horticulture facilities and also doing wildlife rehabilitation. And while doing that, sort of discovering, what's considered a successful rehabilitation of an animal is to release it back into the world where it was injured in the first place. So then I started thinking about habitat restoration and bigger, like why is the world why are we so destructive on wildlife and plants? And then I got more into growing plants that was part of habitat restoration efforts. So worked at different places before I ended up with the Friends of Beaufort Park, but this seems like a good fit for now.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And then finally, Mike.
I grew up spending a lot of time outdoors. When I went to college, I was always pretty enamored with plants, but I didn't really know it was native plants that I was the most into. Started taking ID courses and kind of went crazy with that and excited about all that, and thought I was going to grow all that on my own, and started trying to do a lot of that while starting to work at Seven Oaks also. And then like a year later, they had offered if me and a friend of mine wanted to purchase it. So we did that. And about 5 years ago, we looked up, and it's going pretty good.
Great. Okay, and that's given us some great time to get grower questions filtered to the top. So I'm just going to start asking these from our attendees. So this one, oh, they just moved. So this is a quick one, maybe for growers. How often are you collecting wild seed to supplement your stock?
Anybody in particular? How are you going to do this, Alexis? Do we just chime in, or do you call our names?
Let's just, yeah, I can try to direct some of these as I read them to one or two of you, as I know about your operations and if they relate to that. So, so yeah, I guess Lynda and Mieko, are you collecting wild seed?
I try to collect every year some stuff. I used to try to collect everything all the time, but it's just me. We don't hire collectors. So I try to do what I can. Right now I'm getting really old. My knees are killing me. So I try to pick, one or two target plants. Like if I need to enhance the Clarkia purpurea field, I like, okay, where do I know to go? And I just try to focus on that because I'm pretty much 24/7 in the field with my guys. So seed collecting is tough, but it's a good question because genetic refresh for these things is a pain in the butt. So if the buyers want G1 fields and seed, then you've got to always be either saving stock of G0 and, or figuring out how to go get new collections. So I try to do some every year.
Yeah, I would say similar. We try and go out every year, and maybe we're not getting the same species every year, but we keep a stash of, a few years of wild seed, and then we'll replenish our fields as we need to. And we're a little bit luckier, maybe, Lynda, since we have the park is our location for collecting most of our seed. And but with depending on the weather and the year, like last year we had a really hot spell in April, and it really fried out a lot of the vernal pool species. So even if we do go out, we don't always have propagules to get, although after Tom's talk, it's like maybe we should be scraping up the gravel and looking for anything that might have survived. Those really hardy little seeds.
Okay, that sounds great. Okay, we'll move on to the next because I think we're getting quite a few questions pop in here. So the next question is, and we can figure out who to address this to, can you speak to how farmers can add a small amount of native seed plots to their farming operations to supplement and diversify their operations? For example, is the specialized equipment needed? How difficult to add a native seed program to a typical farming operation? Peter, do you feel comfortable answering this one?
I can tackle that. It just depends what kind of scale you want to do it at, because if you just want a small plot of a forb, that you can hand harvest and hand clean, and you got a market for it, that's not that hard to do if you can get a seed source and kind of figure it out. If you want to go into larger scale production, it can be without having the seed cleaning equipment and the harvesting equipment and all that stuff, it's a fair bit of investment to get into it. And it's also a limited market. I mean, there's not a lot of room. I mean, there's demand for a lot more seed, varieties of seed, I think, out there than are produced, but the economics of producing all those different varieties that you can only sell a small amount of are not very good. So something you got to be real careful with.
Can I chime in real quick to do an addendum to that? Because I think the market demand is very important, since you may have people from other regions in this. The Willamette Valley is a teeny tiny ecoregion. So there's only so much restoration going on. West, those are larger ecoregions, and there may be actually greater demand. So I would say, if you're a grower interested in this, find a way to kind of find out what the demand is to decide, what's needed and if that's economically feasible to sell your product.
That's a good point, Lynda. I didn't think about, we got such a broad geographic audience. So
yeah, that is definitely a good point. So thank you for that. Next question. How do you weigh seed production or also plant production against maintaining native genetics? I feel that maximizing seed production with optimal additions of nutrients, water, etc., can make the subsequent generations of seeds less viable when you put back onto the native landscape. Any good takers on this?
I'll tackle that, and
Okay.
and I would push back a little bit on that premise. To use as an example, Romer's fescue. When we first started to produce that, we had 6 different collections made from genetically isolated populations around the valley. None of them produced any viable seed. There was too much inbreeding on them. And we took those 6 lines and had them in rows and crossed them. And we've taken that seed and the seed from those crossing of those 6 lines produces a plant that actually produces decent quantities of seed. And, you know, a poor plant, unhealthy plant doesn't produce very good seed. And you need vigorous seed. And I think, so.
I just want to clarify, I'm wondering if they think that this would be standard agricultural methodologies. Does that tweak the genetics of the propagules so that then they're not able to have enough plasticity when put out on the restoration site? That's how I'm reading the question. And I mean, if you're doing just a G1 or even a G2, end product, I don't think there's been enough selection pressure going on to affect. And as Peter said, they may do better on the restoration sites, you know, because it's a more vigorous producer of seed, definitely.
Yeah, I think that is what they were asking. But if Ryan wants to clarify anything in the chat or anything, feel free to do so and we could come back to it. But I'm going to move on to another question. In the opening photo, I think that's the one we have here, it displays herbaceous species lined out in rows or beds. This is a photo from the IAE farm, actually, for our Willamette Valley Native Plant Partnership fields. This is an example of the technology of seed production shaping the conditions under which seeds are grown. We know that voles, for example, love to work their way down the conveniently lined plants. Are any of the panelists growing seed or plants under another regime, such as interplanting of 2 or more species in beds instead of rows? So
companion planting?
Interplantings of 2 or more species in beds instead of rows.
To help avoid problems with predation, it sounds like.
Yes.
I guess I'll kind of jump in on that. We're trying to produce a seed crop. I had a question, Alexis, about this. I guess maybe I'll talk to your producer. How do you clean all of this? You know, the seeds are right next to each other. So if you're interplanting, the problem with interplanting is you've got multiple harvest regimes. So you can't be harvesting one species when the other one may be below it or in between it is ripening at a different time. So, you know, critter control is just critter control. So, you know, you put up kestrel perches, you bait on underground, you do whatever you have to do, but you know, interplanting just doesn't, unless you need a host plant situation, and that's a hand, like a castellea. So then that would be a hand harvested thing, or you just ignore the castellea and harvest whatever it's growing with. So I don't know how you would do that and optimally harvest anything.
I'll just jump in on that. We do have one bed. It's a 10 by 40 bed of Wyethia with some Camassia quamash interplanted with an attempt to hide the camas bulbs from the rodents. We have our another camas bed with that has a screen underground 2 feet deep, and so hardware cloth 1/4 inch to try and keep the rodents out. But the Wyethia has been hammered by ground squirrels who are going for the above ground the flowers and seeds when they are ripe, or even before they're ripe, but they haven't hit the bulbs, which is interesting. And but yes, if you need to mechanically harvest that, it would be a mess. But we have been hand harvesting that particular bed. So, and
so
that is
just bird netting. You got to get bird netting to keep out the squirrels and the goldfinches.
They chew through. Yes, for goldfinches, but they chew through the rodents. Chew through.
Yeah, it can be tricky.
That's clever though. I kind of like that.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move on to another question, and I think hearing from Mike on this one to start, at least from the container side. Are there any species that are consistently in demand and underproduced?
I guess evergreen material is consistently in demand and underproduced. There's really no end to what can be sold in the industry. I think it's always short on, there aren't very many native evergreens for starters, as far as trees and shrubs go. So, you know, you have Garrias and Mahonias and Rhamnus and some other things that people really want those things, and they're hard to produce in this area. Yeah, something like Mahonia aquifolium is easy to produce, but the majority of the other stuff's fairly difficult, and it's difficult to get enough seed of, enough of everything. And that would definitely stand out as what's always in demand, that there's never enough of in the industry.
Yeah. Anybody have any more thoughts on that?
Just
Yeah,
what's in demand that's hard to grow? Is that the question?
No, in demand, but underproduced. Or maybe that equals a hard to grow species as well.
Well, that's probably why, yes. Yeah, I mean, again, I'm like Peter, you know, where you've tried and tried, you know, yeah, it'd be great to have like pounds of Linanthus bicolor, and you're like, you know, tried it on ground cloth, that doesn't work because it doesn't release seed. It doesn't produce a lot of seed, has to be, you know, hand harvested, even if you've got it on ground cloth, because you can't recapture the seed. I mean, there's things I see coming through on specs that just end up being, you know, they want so much of this Wyethia. I mean, I saw like 500 pounds of Wyethia one time on a spec, and I just went, are you insane? You know, this has to be hand harvested and we have to control the critters. And it's like, you're lucky if you get, you know, 50 pounds off 1/10 of an acre by hand harvesting from multiple weeks. So you're never going to see 400 pounds of that. It's not Sedalia.
Okay, great. Thanks. I'm going to move on to the next question. What's your approach to balancing harvest efficiency, such as mechanized harvest in one felled swoop, which likely collects unripe seed as well as ripe, with potential higher. So what's your balance? What's your approach to balancing harvest efficiency with potential higher quality seed harvests by completing several hand collections of only one seed that is ripe for harvest? And I can
I'll say
that.
something, even though it has nothing to, we collect seed all the time here, and we're faced with that all the time. It's either you go send someone out 6 or 8 or 10 times to collect a little bit off of there each time, assuming your memory is correct, or maybe you have it set up that they know to go do that. Otherwise, it's, you know, it's kind of tough to, well, it depends on what your need is, really, because like sometimes we'll be like, oh, there's so much seed right here, we could care less if we lose 50% of it, and let's get it all done in 2 hours or whatever. So it's kind of, that's what ends up determining whether we go out 6 or 8 times or we go out just once and not worry about losing a whole bunch of seed.
So Mike, is that for wild collecting?
No, that would be in the nursery that I'm talking about. Wild collecting almost becomes impossible for us to repeatedly visit sites the same year or within the same 3-week time frame or something like that.
Sure, and hopefully not harvesting everything out of a population.
Yeah, absolutely, right.
Anyway.
Where it's like, if it's snowberries off our 1 gallons, we can harvest every single one and end up with great genetic diversity, but wouldn't do anything of the sort, obviously, nor would you want to, even if it was all right to do out in the wild.
Yeah, I guess I would add to that yes, it depends on the species. The window of ripeness may be a little bit narrower than others, and like we are fortunate in that we have a volunteer program, and so we have volunteers who can help us with some of these tasks that would not be possible if we just relied on paid staff. So like our Aquilegia formosa bed, for instance, those, you know, come ripe over 6 weeks. And so there's someone out there almost every day picking, and then we get pretty good quality and pretty high yield that way, but not practical if we didn't have the volunteer component. And then there's some others where I think no matter what you do, there's always going to be some that are a little bit underripe and some that you've lost, and then you end up with some, you know, seed shatter on the ground. But yeah, I would say it depends on the species and how valuable that seed is to market or for the project you need it for.
Yeah, I would just also add, and this is a perfect example of why I do ground cloth capture. I mean, it's got its own problems as well, and some plants absolutely hate being grown on ground cloth. Aquilegia has no problems. It does great on ground cloth. So we just let it completely shatter every seed. We get high quality, high germ seed and really good yields. Other species like Geranium origanum hated ground cloth. It turned into a rusty disaster. And so we had to go back to doing it by a machine harvest there is no optimal time for Geranium origanum at all, and you can't hand harvest it. So we machine harvest it, and sorry, Alexis, that's why your seed is so few pounds. We get 2 pounds or maybe 4 if we're lucky out of the plot, because we have to do a machine harvest. So, you know, there's no optimal for any species. You just have to find what works to optimize, as Mike said, what your goal is.
Yeah, definitely. That makes sense. It's definitely a variety of options for every species. It's going to be different. So, okay, well, kind of along that line, this is going, I think, to wild collection of seed. Where are these nurseries collecting wild seeds, and what protocols or regulations are they using or following to ensure lack of overharvest? We have instances of people getting caught on private land, giving the rest of us a bad name, or on public land without permission. What regulatory entity is there to oversee hundreds of individual nurseries collecting wild seeds in the same region?
Can I start?
Sure. Yes,
Okay.
please.
Well, and actually, this has been at least in the Willamette Valley, this was a huge discussion, and Mieko, I think you already know this, about the West Eugene wetlands. Because when IEA started wanting to collect, they were collecting from the state collection areas that the West Eugene wetlands was. And our species selection committee, we were all very concerned about overharvest. When you've got so few people collecting, and there's really just so few people collecting in the Willamette Valley, kind of talk with each other, and we know where people are collecting. Some people have collected on the same sites I have, but I usually know about them. So I'm not really, and frankly, I think we all follow very strict protocols as far as not over collecting. There's sort of a baseline, 25% of an annual, if you're lucky, you can even do that, or 50% of a population of perennials, which rarely happens. And over collecting is really the main concern is annual species, because they need to repopulate that site. I don't know if you could ever over collect a perennial. And so I think just good communications. Agencies, do you get in trouble for, yes, try not to trespass, doesn't always work. There are some agencies, they're not amenable to seed collecting on their stuff in their areas. They will not give you permits. So just keep up our good names. We should try to avoid that. Try. So, I mean, that's how we deal with it. We just try to talk with, if I'm trying to collect on a site IEA does, I'd certainly let them know, and just good communication.
I think that's good stuff that Lynda said. I'd also add, that out of everybody that does collect seed out there, I doubt a single person would say that they're out raping the landscape for every single seed. So you really don't know, and you hope that everybody, it's really a personal thing if a person has that integrity or not. You like to think everyone does.
Yeah. Any other, Peter or Mieko, any thoughts on that?
we collect, excuse me, within the Mount Pisgah area. Black, sorry, and we do a, don't visit the same populations all the time and collect less than 25% for annuals, and some of those populations we have been able to monitor over time also. So
Okay, sounds great. Yeah, it looks like we've got just about 5 or 6 minutes left, so I think time for a couple more questions. So next I see, how did you facilitate that step from sitting on seed or plants to connecting with buyers? It seems to be a challenge to balance scaling up to appeal to larger projects with the financial risk of not selling it. So Peter, we haven't heard from you for a bit. You want to start with this one? If appropriate, I guess.
I don't know that I got a good answer for that.
Okay.
I mean, you just have to know enough people and have the connections to the buyer community and to know what people are interested in. No, it's not and I'm not sure I would go down the same road. If I had to do it over again, without the connections that I made early on, I never would have succeeded and had as much success as I've had.
Yeah,
Okay,
I think
thanks.
sitting on seed, that was my main concern from the beginning. And so that's why we kept them very small and then just try to figure out what we were going through and not going through. We don't usually sit on anything more than 2 years. But of course I've been doing it for 20 years. So I kind of have it dialed in, bump up production where I'm running out of seed. We also sometimes don't harvest a field. We've had overstock of potentilla and I just cut it down before it ripens. I can do that with sedge seed too. So luckily some of these things you can just kind of mow them down and then wait till you've gone through your stock and hopefully the germ is still good.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm going to move on to another one. Based on market desires, have you focused on workhorse native species for restoration, or have you brought focus to more uncommon species less readily available on the commercial market, or a balance of both? So maybe we could hear from Mike and then also a seed producer to kind of see both sides of that.
We definitely balance that. It's like when there's a simple grass that's in high demand, you don't want to not have it available when it's really easy for you to produce. And it's getting more and more like that. But at the same time, everything else is way more fun. And as far as some interesting species or a grass or anything that you just haven't done before or trying to figure out how to have success with. So in some regard, the workhorses pay for the enjoyable part of doing this stuff.
I can add in, I would agree. For the seed, again, the workhorse species, there's some agencies that only, for us, as I said, 50% of our stuff is mixes, and a little tiny bit of seed can go really far in a mix. So, but there's agencies who do their own mixes or just put out individual species. So we've tried to strike a balance between, being able to sell like those workhorse species by the pound, by at least relatively high pounds, but then keeping the nuanced species, the really cool little high diversity ones that are a pain to grow, like the geranium. And we'll just keep that for either just growing plants or doing just small bits in seed mixes, so that's why our plot sizes are so variable, so we can keep up with having some amount of diversity.
And, we have pretty much just focused mostly on the workhorse species, the grasses that there's a bigger demand for because it fits our scale better. And, yeah, and that we have a market for.
Okay. Well, we have just a few minutes left. I am seeing we have a lot of open questions. So I hope there's a way we can address some of those. I think over lunch, maybe we can save those questions and try to share them with these growers and then share some answers with the group. But also, panelists, you have the option to open the Q&A function in Zoom and type answers to questions if you wanted to spend a few minutes after this addressing any of those. So we'll ask, well, so the one that's at the top here is there a centralized effort to determine pooled demand of land managers, restoration practitioners, and others using native seed in Oregon to inform species selection for increase? If not, do you have thoughts on the benefits of this idea and how to put it into action? And I would just answer and say that is a big part of our plant material and seed partnerships that we have up here in Oregon and in the Southwest as well. But I don't know if there's other ways before that, especially before the Willamette Valley Partnership was established, if there were other ways that the growers were trying to understand the demand of restoration practitioners. So if anyone had some final thoughts on that, we'll use that question to wrap up.
There really wasn't anything. That's why we were all so excited about the, initiating the partnership, because that was the first question that was asked was, how many pounds of X, Y, and Z species do you need per year? And I think we would still benefit from getting even more of that information to decide, do I put in, or does Peter put in, or what do we put in to meet that demand that's, and is that possible? So that the buyers understand what is and isn't possible.
Yeah, I know that informing production efforts is a huge help and part, and having a coordinated kind of central entity to help, with that communication has been a big goal of the Willamette Valley Native Plant Partnership over the last decade. So
one last thing, though, I think the biggest problem you're probably finding is that agencies don't know either. So if it's hard for an agency when they're only getting funded in spits and starts to know, hey, I really do need this much every year. I think that's something they just don't know either.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have situations like when you have fires and people want to plant stuff and they want more than what's out there. So. Yeah, there's a lot of factors every year. There's unknown funding, and just the planning ahead can be difficult. That's what I'm hearing from partners that I work with when I ask them about their upcoming needs. Okay, well, our time is up for today. I did just want to remind or have a message here from one of our planning groups that for those, I think there was several people that mentioned they could not sort questions at the beginning of the day when I mentioned that. So you can update your Zoom, and that should provide the ability to sort the Q&A to the most recently asked. And then just want to give a huge thanks to our growers. Thanks for being here today. If you have a few minutes to look through some of the questions that are in the Q&A box, there's some really good other questions in there. Funding is one, and about growing annuals, and more about harvesting seed and other questions. So
how long will those be up, Alexis?
They will be up until they're answered, or until we come back from lunch, which will be at 12:30 Pacific time. Yeah, so we're gonna break here. We have about an hour for a lunch break, and then we'll start our Southwest content at 12:30 Pacific. But yeah, growers, please feel free to stay on if you have a few minutes. And thanks to everybody for a great morning.
Thanks,
And
Alexis.
we'll see you in a bit.